Welcome to the Dark Mind Podcast. All right, friends and familiars. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dark Mind Podcast, where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, I have a poet that transforms the written word into an immersive visual experience to explore the deeper truths of existence. He's joining me today to discuss his debut poetry collection entitled An Anthem for the Dreaming Lost. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of Samuel Hurley. All right, friends and familiars, we are live on YouTube and Twitch with Samuel Hurley. Samuel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 16th day of August 2024. I came across your Instagram page on the recommendation of Ruth Ann Jaggy, but with your massive social media presence, I'm surprised I didn't stumble upon it myself. The videos you post are an immersive experience that slingshot the viewer into the mind of the poet and the cadence of his spoken word. So I was thrilled to hear that you were committing your words to a collection. And once I received it, I was able to hang on to every word and reread lines with my obsessively detailed nature. So I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad to have you on the show today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me, yeah.
Well, let's see here. First question for you is, I read in your bio, you state that you are a believer in Romanticism. Now, being neck deep in a postmodernist world, which is anything but romantic, how do you maintain this love and find the inspiration to produce poetry that is realistic, emotional, yet optimistic?
That was a good question. I mean, to me, I think the world is the same as it has always been. I think we certainly live in a time where we maybe interpret the world in have many more distractions, but it's the romantic world of the romantic poets still exists, and the way that we're able to connect with the world, and that ability still lies within us. For me, I think I was quite lucky to grow up with a dad who was a performance clown, and although I grew up working class, we lived by a woodland, so being outdoors and being connected to nature and connected to art, and for me, meaning was just inherent to sort of the way I grew up, and to magic and a sense of wonder. But for me as well, I think Romanticism, I think that word means something different to everyone. It's really hard to find a consistent definition of what it is to be romantic. I mean, even romantic poets that, the original canonical 6 are very, very vastly different in lots of ways in terms of what they wrote about and what they believed. For me, being romantic is having an emotional and an imaginative connection with the world, and sort of letting in that sublime and that ability to feel and not shut off and be connected to experience, whether that's positive and joyful or whether it's terrifying and part of suffering. I mean, in my book, there are poems there which are emotional and optimistic, but there's also lots of poems in there which are existential, even nihilistic and full of despair, because I think it's my job or it's my task. I'm showing what it's like to be and live a human life. I'm talking from a real point of view. And there's times certainly when I've not felt that life is romantic or that we should romanticize things. But it's about overcoming those and getting back to that state of like peak experience and that connection to what matters and what has meaning.
I'm going to admit my ignorance and see if I can produce a teachable moment here. Can you tell me about the canonical six?
Yeah, so typically you're talking about Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Blake, Shelley. They're the British Romantic poets. Although they weren't aware they were part of a Romantic movement, and they probably wouldn't have used the term Romantic to define themselves. Here in the UK, they were what spearheaded the Romantic revolution, certainly in poetry. But it all really began with the German Romantic philosophers and the sort of the invention of self and the exploration of meaning and that change there in literature and art.
Yeah. And to kind of speak on how you were talking about having a father that fostered this, I don't think you used the word optimistic, but an outlook on life that is a little bit more reasonable than maybe I and most people have today. I recently saw a guy, I can't remember his name or what his credentials were, but he was giving a TED talk and was talking about how the world is flooded with media personalities whose job it is to stimulate the amygdala in the brain. That's the job is to get you emotional, afraid, and scared. But then he reverted back to the 80s, to the 70s, to the 60s, and gave examples of wars, of social unrest. He's like, it's the same thing happening today, just to different people. I thought that was a really kind of it sucks that horrible things are going on, but kind of a calming perspective in the sense that, everybody thinks, oh, it's never been this bad. This is the end of the world type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, it's certainly been a lot worse. Not for everyone, but hearing the technological advancement and medical, innovation, we live healthier and longer, certainly. And we certainly have access to a lot more freedoms than generations before would have had. But that doesn't mean life is easy for everyone. That stuff can mean nothing, depending on your personal experiences and your personal strifes, and we all have them.
Yes, sir. Well, I talk to writers of prose fiction about their process. Is your poetry, I imagine, is probably an inspired stream of consciousness that hits you all of a sudden. I could be over.
You are romantic. There you go.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, if not, what is the impetus for your writing at any given time?
It's a mix of both of those things. It's a mix of there's certainly times where I'm heavily inspired and I'll get a line or a poem flows out, and I'm moved or charmed to write, stimulated by a piece of art or by an emotion or music or a scene, and those are when it's good and you feel like a poet. And then there's the other side, which is the craft, and that's the 90% of it, which is when you have to sit down and you have to dig. And certainly in the editing process, I do write fiction as well as poetry, and the only difference is one is a marathon and one's a sprint. You can get to the end of a poem quite quickly, so you have these little victories, whereas a novel or a short story, you have to bear with it a lot longer. And that's when that discipline of your craft, to sit down and go, do you know what? I don't want to do this today. I don't like what I'm writing. It all feels, shit. That you push through. And it's the same with poetry, and it's the same certainly with my poetry. I might have like an inspired line or theme, and then I'll rush and write it down, and then I come back to it and I go, I don't even know what I was trying to say. I've got to find the way to make this into a structured poem that other people can read. So it's a bit of both.
And do you find that when you are writing prose, peppering the writing process along the way with bursts of creativity, like your poems, kind of, they're like, you see a marathon runner running the marathon, come across some people that hand them Gatorade. Is it like little refreshments to get you through to the end?
Yeah, well, I think what's really important is having like an emotional connection to your work, and having a clear vision. And you've got to at least have that as a base level. Sometimes you don't have to enjoy what you're writing, but you have to feel something. It has to feel important. So yeah, so when I'm writing those longer pieces, I certainly need that pep where I go. I'm reconnected with why I'm telling this story, and emotionally connected with the events, because that's ultimately the you can do any writing course, you can learn any number of ways how to write a poem or a sonnet, but ultimately you want people to feel when they read your work. It doesn't matter what that is, whether it's sorrow or joy or hate, or you just don't. The people need to feel, and if you're not feeling it, if you're not emotionally connected, then I think it's very difficult for your readers to be.
Gotcha. So it says, and we've already talked about this before we started recording, getting everything set up internet-wise. It says in your bio that you live in and correct me if I'm wrong, 350-year-old cottage?
Yeah. Although that's not as rare as it probably is to you in America. This is a country full of castles, and there's houses that are much older.
Yeah.
We still have our modern castles, but yeah, I live in a 350-year-old cottage at the moment.
Beautiful. How did you? I mean, maybe I'm, as you said, making it seem more scarce than it actually is. I was just curious to know how you happened upon this cottage, and how does its aesthetic align with the tenor of your poetry?
How I came to live here is probably less interesting than it is, and it's just we were looking for looking to get somewhere bigger, because we were expanding the family, and we were in a 2-bed house which was probably about 80 years old, and we found a dilapidated cottage that was for a very reasonable price, but it had no kitchen and no gas and no boiler. A lot of this we didn't know till we moved in, and so we went for it, because for me, being close to nature, like in terms of like as a writer, and I am an introvert, so I quite like having somewhere which is away from the city, and I can I like to hike and wild camp, and 2 seconds and I'm out on the moors and the hills, and my writing is very influenced by nature and by the beauty of blissful solitude. But I do have 2 kids, so beauty, blissful, and solitude is it's not always on the menu.
Sometimes few and far between.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I always talk about we want to move to the middle of the country somewhere, but we still want to have fiber internet and it be a place that Amazon delivers. So it's like we want to get away from the city, but we still want too invasive connections to it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Wi-Fi here is absolutely awful, and it's one of the things I'd change about living in a cottage.
Oh, well, I'm sure something will change as far as infrastructure, or maybe, who knows, the stuff they come up with. They may come up with satellite internet that's better than fiber. Well, it also says in your bio, and you just alluded to it, that you have a love for wild camping. Tell me a little bit about wild camping as a concept, specifically the nights you spend in moors, which I imagine that a moor would probably produce some of your darker, more, brooding poetry?
Yeah, so I mean, wild camping. I'm not sure if it's I've not done the research. I'm not sure if it's a term that you would use in the States. It's called wild camping here because it's actually illegal to camp on the land. Most of the land in England's very, very small. So most of the land is private, if not all of it. So you aren't allowed to camp anywhere that isn't an official campsite. So somewhere that's designated, so you turn up with your family and your cars and blah, blah, blah. So wild camping is when you camp illegally, I suppose, but off from those places, so you get more of a, you don't have a toilet, and it's not glamping. It's not glamorous. It's you're literally in the stick of it. And for me, I do it less and less these days because of the kids. But for me, it's a way to sort of completely shut off, to step away from the hustle, the bustle, the all the technology and all the distractions we have, and just be connected to the world, the earth. And I do bits of grounding and whatnot. And the moors, I think the term the moors have like a, going to like Wuthering Heights, it's like it's dark and it's brooding, but it's beautiful. Certainly when the moors up here, like you just get complete clear skies. You can see all the stars, and it is beautiful. Sometimes it is terrifying because you are out there on your own in the dark, and but I think terror is as much a part of beauty as is the aesthetics of it. Feeling alive and feeling like how we would have felt hundreds of years ago when you couldn't just call someone. And I've got lost a few times, and that's quite scary and fun, and a bit adventurous. So,
yeah, whenever I think of moors, I think of the Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah,
and I was wondering. So, I mean, you're trying to unplug. Do you bring your phone with you? Like, just in case you have something for an emergency, or do you just go totally like rogue?
No, I take my phone with me. I mean, on one hand, I'm diabetic as well. So there's more of a risk for me being out there should something happen. Nothing ever has, but I wouldn't, as much as it's exciting to feel wild, like you have to have a bit of common sense. Certainly when you've got kids, like, your well-being affects your family then. So I usually have my phone with me. I just try not to use it.
Yeah. Well, you alluded to it already that you were raised by a professional clown and a psychiatric nurse, which infused you with, quote, a unique blend of creativity and compassion. So those two keywords, creativity and compassion, are very present in your work. And my podcast niche is dark literature. And one of the reasons I felt that your work was appropriate for the show was your kind of gothic aesthetic and fearless exploration of the topics of existence, death, sadness, love, and pain. So does the expression, no good deed goes unpunished, often come into play in your life? And if so, how do you maintain a sense of compassion?
I wouldn't say. There's certainly been times when kindness has either been taken advantage of, or it's not been returned or received in the way that I want it. But I think everyone can say that. And we can say that with any range of, we can say that with selfishness or pride. Human nature is fickle. I would say that for me, when I am compassionate, because that's not it's not my constant state. I am human. I'm capable of being those things, of being selfish and being human and cruel and self-centered sometimes, but I try to be compassionate and try to understand other people and try to understand and give out compassion and give out understanding. But I think as a default, that's we should all strive to that. We should all strive to be compassionate. I don't like the idea of a world where we're striving to do the opposite. There's enough of that. And like you were saying at the beginning of the podcast, although history sort of repeats itself and time has always been dark and there's always been evil and there's always been bad people doing stuff, I don't think that means that we just have to accept that that's the way that we are. I think we are capable. That dichotomy of being human, we have the ability to be exceptionally cruel, and we see that every day. But we also have the ability to be good and give and create beauty and create happiness and joy. And I think no matter what, I have a poem in my book which is called Remain Tender, and it's about, despite being hurt, like if you can, it's a victory to remain naive and remain tender and open. And because once we shut off, we limit what we can experience. We limit our ability to feel good and joy and love. And I think it's really important that we do try and remain empathetic and compassionate.
Yeah, and that kind of answers my next question, which had to do with, in the preface of your book, you make the declaration that, quote, to exist is an extraordinary gift. So regardless of the position that people are in, the most disenfranchised, disillusioned, just totally disinterested in doing anything but doing drugs and alcohol, just a slow self-destructive pattern until they're dead. You're a lot more likely to not exist than to exist. How would you persuade this hypothetical person to accept the fact that what they do in fact have is a gift and they need to make the most of it?
Well, I mean, that largely sounds like a position of therapy rather than poetry, although I do think poetry can certainly be a therapist. I think you sort of just semi-answered it there in the sense of what I'm trying to say in that is that, let's strip that back from a romantic or a dreamer's point of view. From a purely rational point of view, the fact that you do exist is extraordinarily rare. It is, we're looking out at the moment. We haven't found any concrete signs of life, certainly not life like human life. So we know that it's rare. We don't know how rare. There might be, the universe is so vast. There might be billions of planets and billions of species of creature or sentient beings out there. But we've not found that. And at the moment, the proof we have is that we could be the only examples of life on Earth. I doubt that we are. So from that point of view, life is certainly extraordinarily rare. Now, the gift part of it, then absolutely, when you're in those moments, I've had tremendous loss and hardship. And I don't stand here saying when that was happening, I was stood there with a smile going, wow, isn't this wonderful? How lucky I am. Because that's not how we're meant to live. We're meant to process those things. We are meant to suffer through those things. It's when we come to the end or we come out the other side and we're able to go, okay, well, if I can frame this in a way where, yes, I've lost this person, but I also had a chance to love this person, that there's limitless potential in life for all experience. And at the very, very beginning of my book, the first poem, it ends with, come life, have me, love me like the child who harms the flower it wants to know. And that's really the philosophy of that book, of my book, if there is a philosophy there, which is it's worth risking suffering to experience the beauty of loving and being loved, and having those tender, beautiful moments. And you need to, in order to have those, you need to risk that someone's going to hurt you, that opportunities are going to fail, that sticking your neck out on the line, or putting your poems online, or writing a book, that it isn't going to probably be just a rosy ride. So I don't think I've answered your question, but
I think I just found the sound bite for the show that I'm going to put out.
But yeah, I think everyone has their own struggles and strifes and challenges, and life is very, very difficult sometimes, and more so for other people. But if we can persist and find things that we individually find meaning in, then I think we can step back and sort of go, okay, we live a universal experience, but we experience things in a very subjective and personal way, but we're still part of this universal experience and this potential always.
Gotcha. Well said. Well said. Well, when it comes to the written word, so you said you also write short stories and novels, even longer prose. Have you released any previous to this, or are there plans for upcoming releases?
Yeah, so I've been working on a novel, which hopefully is out next year. I've submitted stuff in the past, and I've got a few novels written, but I'm working on one at the moment, which hopefully is out next year. And then I've written countless short stories that I've not put out there and published, but I've submitted to places of publication. So I do write prose and fiction.
Okay. And is this something that came along with your writing of poetry, or is it something you did before? Did the chicken or the egg come first?
They arrived at the same time via delivery, via Amazon. I've always written. I've always enjoyed storytelling, whether that's through poetry or through fiction. And I've written for as long as I can remember. So they're sort of linked to each other. Poetry has always been that exploration for me of feeling and trying to untangle my head and my own life experiences, or the bigger questions in life. Then with the fiction, although I explore similar themes, I get a chance to play a bit more and, also step back. I can sort of, a bit like being an actor, I can go, okay, well, I'm not going to talk about my loss here. I'm going to give that to, I'm going to make a character suffer. I'm going to, so both, yeah.
Yeah, so talking about making a character suffer, you're talking about a very cathartic experience.
Yeah, and I think writing is that. It certainly is that.
Yeah. Well, circling back to your book, in your poem, "As a Boy, I Stood Before a Tree," you paint a vivid picture of an introvert, which we've already talked about you willingly admitting to being, which I'm sure being an introvert and having the ability to indulge in solitude is necessary for the inspiration to produce such vivid poetry. So, as you said, you have a family. Sometimes it's hard to get time alone for contemplation. Does that cause your creativity to suffer, not just from the loss of production time, because you need time to sit down and actually write it out, but the ability to find the inspiration that you garner when you've kind of shut yourself out off from not necessarily the outside world, but shut yourself off from distraction?
Yeah, it's a good question, because there's a few things there that sometimes contradict themselves. Because in order to write, you have to experience life. My poetry would be very, very boring if all I did was sit in a forest and look at the stars, you know. So you have to live. You have to have those experiences, and it's my personal philosophy that writers are always writing. We're always taking in our surroundings, our events, things that are happening, the people we speak to, and we sort of bank them. The solitude and being an introvert, I think that's when you start to turn those experiences into sensible poetry. So you take these abstract things or these specific solid events, and you look for the poetry in them, and you look for a way to explain and make sense of them. And I think certainly solitude and time to reflect when you're doing the process of writing, it is essential, as well as the rumination and the philosophical exploration of those things. I need solitude. I'd find it very difficult to do that in the middle of a bar, or certainly trying to chase my 3-year-old around the park. My mind isn't sort of there. But yeah, and then I think being it's strange, because obviously what I do, being a poet, that's it's natural potentially to be an introvert, but then I stick myself online, and stick a camera in front of my face and then put myself out there to thousands of people, and that's quite strange, because it goes against sort of my inclination to shut off and go and sit in the wood and stare at the sky for 6 or 7 years.
Well, you mentioned your chasing your 3-year-old in the park. I imagine with regard to you've got to live life to produce poetry, that experience right there, being in the park with your child, or just being around kids in general at a playground, probably has a lot to do with you diving into writing about your childhood, which you talk about as being one of the main themes of your book. Maybe not necessarily your childhood, but childhood in general as well.
Yeah. It's a huge theme, because the first 7 years of your life, you live off it for the next 60 years of your life. You speak to anyone and they'll go, "Oh, when I was a child," we all have these stories, these defining moments of our childhood. But very few of us then have defining moments of, say, the past 10 years. You get into your 30s, your 40s, and you say, "Well, give me, a significant event in the past 5 years." And for most of us, we sort of go, "I don't know, I had a holiday in Greece, that was nice." But if you ask someone about their childhood, it'll be bam, 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 just countless moments of meaning and learning and depth, and it shapes us, and we are anchored to it. And I think we're anchored to it in good ways and bad ways. And I think we, certainly in the West, we sort of come out of childhood and into adulthood, and we leave a lot of things that we should have taken with us behind. A lot of the way we see and experience the world, we sort of dismiss as childish, or not worthy of adult experience. So that's why it's massively important to me, because I think it's a crime to ourselves.
Gotcha. Well, when I read your poetry, or when I read your poetry, I get a glimpse of not only the mind of a poet, but also a philosopher. What are some philosophers that you resonate with?
I really like the work of Colin Wilson. I really like his positive existentialism, and he talks a lot about peak experience, which is sort of, I would say, one of the fundamental parts of what I mean when I say romantic, which is this this ability to enter into heightened states of feeling and emotional connection with things and people and places, and I think he writes a lot about that and about consciousness and about our connection to meaning through art and beauty and nature and he's also not a philosopher that shies away from things like the occult or mysticism. I do also
gentleman right here.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah. And he's got some fabulous books and some really wonderful ideas. And I sort of discovered him in my 20s. He's got a book called The Outsider.
The Outsider. I've heard of that.
Yeah, not to be confused with Camus's Outsider.
No. I've specifically heard of Colin Wilson's.
Yeah.
Do you know where I've heard it from? It is on the recommended reading list. This might don't let this weird you out. This is on the recommended reading list by the Church of Satan.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can sort of see why some of those ideas in there would be they would want you to read that book. It's quite a difficult book to read. I tried to reread it. I read it in my 20s, and I tried to reread it a few years back. And it's quite difficult to get through. He's got a book called The Occult, which is massive, but much easier to push through, and certainly interesting if you're into things like meaning and spiritualism. But I really like the Victor Schelling and Hegel, the early German romantics who sort of spearheaded Romanticism.
Well, in your poem, Victory, Human Thing, and I know I keep kind of I have quite a few questions about like, what is it about the messiness of life that makes it worth it and attracts you and inspires you? But circling back to your poem, Victory, Human Thing, you make a very salient statement. It is not time to be post-human, it is time to be most human. And that if a digital entity could have one wish, they would want, quote, this painful, beautiful, strange, and comically brief trial of life. So when it comes to the duality of life, pleasure, pain, hate, love, light, darkness, some philosophers like Albert Camus simply state that life is absurd. Just embrace the absurdity of life. Why do you think that something digital based on an orderly program would want to experience the chaos of life?
You're really trying to test me these questions, aren't you, Vince? So I think it's a paradoxical statement, really, and it's not meant for the machine. We're not really. It's inviting the reader to imagine what it would be like to feel nothing. Because if a machine, if a computer, if a calculator could desire, then it's halfway there to being human anyway. Because the machines can't desire. Artificial intelligence, I've got a poem which is AI versus the poet, and I get sort of, lots of people like that poem, lots of people don't like that poem. I get quite a few people who don't like the poem.
It's a very polarizing topic right now.
Oh, it is hugely so, but it's hugely important. Make the sort of argument that, well, actually, someone said recently, like, you're taken away from sort of like the triumph of the machine. Like, machines can play chess and they can write poems and they can do all this, and it's like the problem is we personify. We have to personify technology in order to make those statements. You play a game of chess on a computer with a machine, but the computer is not playing with you. Play is a human thing. It's a living thing. Computers can't play. It just is in the sense that they can't be happy, they can't be sad, they can't, playing a game of chess against a computer, you might go, oh, well, I beat the computer. And you haven't beaten the computer. You've beaten the computer on a setting. It's allowed you to win. Whatever difficulty you've got your chess game on, it's performing a set of functions. It's not playing. So it's a paradoxical statement because machines can not feel, and therefore they can't desire to feel. However, as human beings, we have the imagination to sort of put ourselves and go, okay, well, what would it be like to feel absolutely nothing, to take all the sorrows, all the pain and strife that I've experienced as a human being, and rid that alongside all the joy and hope, in order to get rid of it, to live that dichotomy of the fact that you have to risk suffering, you have to go through suffering in life. The longer you live, the more you're going to suffer. You're going to lose people. You're gonna fail. You're gonna fall. And for me, and this is just my personal opinion, having been through grief and loss and moments where life hasn't felt like it's worth living, but coming to the other side of it, I wouldn't give those things up. I wouldn't go, you know what, I want to not experience anything. I want to become machine-like. And that poem really is just, it's a warning that as we head towards a time where probably very soon we are going to be able to upgrade ourselves. We're going to be able to, Elon's brain chip, and, people are talking about, extending life to immortality and how AI is the new God, and, that potentially these are the last human years. It's let's take a minute, let's breathe before we give up things, because life is sometimes hard. Let's examine what we are giving up, and what triumphs it is to be a living, breathing, tender, breakable human thing, rather than being just something that performs tasks and exists.
I forget who it was I interviewed. He said, we've basically outsourced all there is to be human.
It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And that poem, the AI versus the poet, is I'm not against technology at all. I think certainly AI, it has the power to liberate us. It has the power to potentially cure all disease, all financial and resource issues that we face. But certainly for the dawn of it, it's going to be in the hands of people who've always been in power. And I think we've had the power to solve a lot of the issues that plague the world currently, and those who deem it so haven't done so. But it's human nature to progress and to explore and to innovate, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I do think that there is more than one direction, and I think if we head in the direction where we try to replace all human experience and all human challenges with a digital slave, I think we're just going to enslave ourselves and be rid of anything that actually has meaning.
Well, taking it on to a little bit of a lighter note, the way that a lot of people are introduced to your poetry is through the immersive videos you post on social media. And having experience in audio and video production myself, I know that those videos that you do require time and talent to create. You're not just whipping your smartphone out and making a TikTok video. You're putting in some serious work. So do you produce those yourself? And can you kind of tell us a little bit about the production process, such as where they're recorded and things like that?
Yeah, so at the moment I do produce them all myself. I think there's one or two that I've had help with, but I don't know if they're on my page. I have a background in theatre and independent film, So I sort of know production from a professional point of view because I've worked as a graphic designer and a video editor as well. So I have a good sense of the technical aspects and the storytelling aspects of video. I've been around video, and I've been around independent filmmaking since the first Canon 5D came out and sort of revolutionized indie filmmaking, because all of a sudden you could get a cinematic look for a fraction of the price. Where I film is mostly around Lancashire, here where I live. I film where I go and where I live, and walk and hike and wild camp, because those are the places that inspire me to write, and that certainly evoke feeling in me. And then the process tends to be, when I've written a poem and I go back to it, I try and think of scenes that complement the poem without taking too much away. But I film a lot. If you type in Silverdale, this is a place that Silverdale, Lancashire.
Silverdale?
Yeah.
Oops. Let's see what we get for images here.
Yeah, a lot of my videos are filmed in here. It's just one of my favorite places on earth. It's beautiful.
Wow. Yeah,
forest.
It looks like the videos.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's just the coastline. There's like thick forests which have like a fairy-like quality. It's a really beautiful place.
Yes, sir. Great place for great on-location shooting. Well, circling back to the book, in your poem To the Ego, you state that the ego often wants to kill its host or abandon it when its dream is low. This made me think of the phrase egomaniac with an inferiority complex, where it's impossible to remain right-sized. Ruth Ann Jaggi described you as a very humble individual, noting that you were quite overwhelmed by your success. Do you wrestle with states of pride and inferiority when it comes to your writing and success? And if it's not too personal, could you tell us a little about it?
Yeah. It's quite, as I sort of mentioned before, it's quite paradoxical in the sense of, I think a lot of writers are introverted and private, and I'm certainly, you wouldn't maybe guess that if you went to my Instagram and see me standing there and, bearing my pains and joys to the world. But for the longest time, I've been making poetry videos for about 15 years, which is a very long time to be doing it. I think that predates Twitter. So I've always tried to sort of showcase my writing in a sort of video first type of way, or sort of wanted to. And that comes from having a background in theatre and film. But having a larger following has been new, and that's taken some adjustment, because I was at a place where I already felt successful, as in, success to me means I'm living a life that is true to my values. So I was already writing and creating art and things that meant something to me, and I was lucky enough to have a few people who connected with what I was doing, and and were friends. I knew all my followers, and then I had a poem go viral, and gained, I think, like 20,000 followers in like 48 hours, and woke up going,
that's crazy how that happens.
It is crazy, and it's quite scary, really, because although you're tempting that beast by putting your work out there, and it's careful what you wish for, isn't it? You go, I want more readers, I want more viewers, and then you wake up one day and you've got an inbox
Feast or
full
famine.
of people. Well, yeah, well, exactly, yeah. And and then all of a sudden you're dealing with all aspects of that. You're dealing with people who love your work, and then you're dealing with people who think you're an absolute tosser, and the people who don't know you, and people make assumptions about you, and people want to know what people want a piece of you, and going from a very private, although I was sharing publicly, but a very private state of I didn't really think much about what I was putting out there. I sort of just did it for myself, and I'd gone. I write in quite a abstract way. It's not. It sits between modern and classical. Maybe it's very highly lyrical. So I didn't think there was much of an audience out there for the sort of some of the stuff that I do. So that's been lovely and wonderful. But then it's been a process and a journey of growth to sort of be able to accept that that's what's happened. And I'm past that point now, but certainly when I started speaking to Ruth Ann, I don't think I handled it very well to start off with.
Gotcha. Well, in your poem On the Color of Her Eyes, you talk very poetically about the beauty of a woman's eyes. And in a society heavily focused on other things, particularly the proliferation of highly sexualized images, people sometimes forget how beautiful a person's eyes can be. And what really struck me about the poem was the ending line, quote, "It takes a poem to tell the truth." Could you speak a little bit about that sentiment?
What that means for me is the whole essence of why we need art, and we need music, and we need literature, and we need poetry, is that we have these, we stand before something beautiful, and it's not enough to say, oh, it's beautiful, it's nice, it's lovely, because we know that those words tend to fall short or feel like they fall short. And sometimes in order to get closer to a vast truth, we need to go into language a bit deeper. We need to go into the place of human meaning, the unconscious, the world of abstracts and icon and logos, and play and find and go, well, what does this mean to love this person, or what does it mean to lose a person? What does it mean to feel alone? And those words alone, death, love, beauty, they're finite, or they feel finite, but they contain these vast multitudes. And when we go into a poem and we're allowed poetic license, we're allowed simile and metaphor and philosophy, I think we get closer to the truth. And that's what I'm trying to say there, is that I'm looking at these eyes, and yes, they are all these things. They're green and grey and blue, and I think I used the word like they have the pleasure of atmospheres. They have these things, but they're not individual. It's a vaster feeling. It's that feeling of the sublime, of being stood before beauty and feeling inferior in the way that you can describe or experience it.
Well, I'm kind of piggybacking off of your allusion to or mentioning of the logos. Your poem, A Complete Atlas for a Wounded Actor, you seem to imply that there are no untimely deaths, that they're all part of a logical flow of time. So I'm assuming from what you stated just a few moments ago, you believe in a God or a higher power, similar to the logos of, say, the Stoics, that underlies the flow of existence. Do you believe in that orderly guidance?
I don't know. If I'm completely honest, I don't know don't know what I believe if I were to try and set it down on paper. I'm not an atheist at all in any way. I've always tried to find a personal connection with what I would class as imaginative spirit or order. I do believe there's design. I do believe that there is order, but there is also chaos and absurdity. And I think there has to be for the other to exist. So in terms of what I believe, I'm going to be very vague. And it's not something that I've been able to pin down. I'll change, and sometimes I go, I'm a pantheist, or I'll read about Christ and find beauty and meaning there, and I read I pick up bits of spirituality and religion, and I find a lot of truth there, but I haven't yet got off the fence, which is yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the truth of existence is so abstract that trying to narrow it down is a fool's errand, because I mean, you can say something like, even if you feel like you've come to a conclusion, the conclusion contradicts itself. Like, you can say there is no absolute truth. Well, that's an absolute statement.
Precisely.
Just like this, you just end up going in circles. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think that's why you have to.
Yeah, but I think that's why we have, story, poetry, abstracts. We have these, Carl Jung talks about the unconscious and the collective unconscious. We have these things that we recognize universally, these repeating themes that seem to pop up in religion and art and poetry and music that we just connect to. They just make sense, from somewhere that we potentially don't know. And I think you're right that I think it's potentially the truth just isn't, it's too complex for us to ever grasp. So we need these myths and legends and stories and art to sort of filter through. We need a poem to tell the truth.
Well said. Well, you speak of Jung, the collective unconscious, and the archetypes. Are you a fan, or I don't know if fan is the appropriate word, but have you ever delved into Joseph Campbell and his study of the hero's archetype?
Through a writing point of view, definitely. Hearing about archetypes and stuff. I know archetypes through Jung. I wouldn't say I'm well versed on Campbell though.
Yeah, the hero's journey, just basically the standard story structure of the hero's journey. There's a call to action. The protagonist, yeah, a man named Joseph Campbell. If you've never read him before, he it's kind of odd. I think he was going for it was either a PhD or a master's degree, and he just got enough of an education. He got enough knowledge that he felt like, okay, I'm good, and just completely disregarded getting the actual degree and began writing. And I mean, his exposition of the hero's hero, I keep calling it the hero's archetype, the hero's journey, is really fascinating. He wrote a few books that are really good. Definitely check him out. Well, as we've alluded to earlier, another theme is childhood, a major theme of your work in the book. And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you? And what are some things from your childhood that a child living today could not experience and or enjoy?
So I'm 30. I'm in my late 30s. I'm hurtling towards the 40-year-old mark.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, so I don't think
it's all downhill from here.
Yeah, feels it. Yeah, I just feel tired all the time. Like the tiredness. Certainly having kids, like getting older. I think people prepare you for that.
Testosterone.
Yeah. In terms of what children today can't experience that sort of maybe I experienced, I don't think there's much. I think there's just more obstacles to it. I mean, there's seminal points of I was around at the birth of the Master System, and seeing computer games become a real household thing, and computers become I grew up in a household for most of my life where there wasn't a computer. There was a house phone, and that was it. That's all we had. Four channels on the television here in the UK, anyway. But I think the intensity and the wonder and the mysticism of childhood, I think we've lost our focus on raising children with that as an importance. And that's, I wouldn't say that's a fault of parents necessarily. I think times have changed. You've gone from having, households where it was very patriarchal, and you had a man who went out to work, and you had a woman who stayed home and looked after the kids and the household, to where most people now have to have both partners working. And so childhood tends to, it has less of a guide. So we rely more heavily on things like entertainment and tablets and technology. And I think one thing that probably is certainly very, very difficult, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, is that being unconnected. I would go out as a 5-6-year-old into the woods without a mobile phone. It would just be, return home in an hour. You might have a watch, but otherwise you'd just sort of guess when that time would be, and you'd listen to the neighborhood kids, and you'd hear parents calling. Whereas now children are connected not only to the home, but to this vast universe of strangers, which is quite terrifying. And I think that there's less time to put importance on things of boredom. And boredom's really important as a child, because that's where you sort of really dig into the metal of what your brain can do. Where you can go. It's where creative power starts to be formed, because you're sat. My parents would just send me off and be like, what is this to do? And it'd be like, here's a stick. Go outside and play with your brothers. And that's where games were invented, and stories. And I still have, when I talk to my brother, we still have stories that we carry with us of myths that we made. And I think children are little myth makers. But now all that work's done for kids, because it's stick Netflix on, stick YouTube on, play a computer game. It's all immediate. It's all immediate pleasure and satisfaction. There's no, you don't have to work through boredom.
Yeah. Well, I'm assuming that your writing medium is a pen and paper or something similar. Maybe I'm wrong. Is there something specific you write in, like a journal? And could you tell us a little bit about the repository of poetic musings you maintain?
So, in general, I do always have a journal with me of some sort. I do like to jot down handwritten notes. And there's certainly a different mental process there when you're carving ink into paper. But I am a modern gentleman, so I will also type into my phone, or I'm not averse. I'm not a snob. I'm not I'm not. I believe in digital minimalism, but I also believe in being sensible. I wouldn't handwrite a novel in a journal and then send that off to a publisher. No one's gonna. I don't think I'd even be able to read my handwriting after that. In terms of like what I tend to write, is less full poems, but it might be like the beginnings of a poem, or the way two words sound together, or sometimes I might overhear a conversation and hear something astonishing or hilarious or beautiful, and I might jot that down. When I'm out, if I'm out, so I will take a notebook when I'm like camping or hiking, and I'll sit and I'll practice description and detail. I try and learn the names of things, so I'll try and like know. Certainly on an intimate level, like, I try and learn the flowers in my garden and the trees, so I'm able to sort of pick out detail, and then I can play with that. So yeah, it's all I suppose sort of lyrical notes, rather than maybe like journal entries.
Interesting. Gotcha. Well, is your poetry influenced more by other poets or by philosophers, and why?
I'm not sure I would say. I'm not sure I would say either. If I think about what influences my poetry, like I'm influenced by, like, I have favorite poets. I have, favorite poems, and they certainly have influenced the way I write and maybe some of the things I write. But when it comes to actually writing, I would say most, if not all, but certainly most of my poetry comes from my own experiences, my own life, the things that happened to me, the people I've lost and loved, the places I go. There are philosophical poems that I write, but I wouldn't say when I'm writing those things, I'm writing a response to, say, Nietzsche or Wilson or Hegel. I'm not trying to go toe to toe with intellectual greats when I'm writing a poem. But they I would say they certainly all influence me. I mean, I'm certainly influenced by philosophical questions and finding my own answers. Because sometimes, and I think this is the thing with philosophy, like, I think you have to be like a patchwork of philosophy. You can't just accept one philosophy. I think Stoicism is really useful sometimes, but apply it to every aspect of your life, and I think you miss out on opportunity. I take bits and pieces from everything, but in general, the topics of my poems are probably influenced just by my own experiences.
Gotcha. Well, maybe bring up some marketing here. You have a pretty solid website where you can get signed copies of your books. And there it is in all its glory there. An Anthem for the Dreaming Lost, a collection of poetry and prose on meaning, love, romanticism, and wonder. So paperbacks as well as hardbacks, or
so it's available.
Or is it just in paperback right now?
So it's in hardback, paperback, and ebook format. So you can get all three from Amazon, and then you can buy signed hardbacks from my site.
And you have a mailing list to stay updated.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty solid website you got here. And then you've also got a Patreon. And see, is it 2 levels of membership?
Yeah, 2 levels of membership.
And the Wonderist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you tell us what's available here on your Patreon?
Yeah, so I've only recently set that up in the past couple of past month or so, and I haven't sort of pushed it massively. But the listener tier is access to audio recordings. So at the moment, I'm reading through John Keats' letters to Fanny Braun, and and then I put on audio recordings of my own work, and then the Wonderist is more focused on video content, and I will be talking about some of the things that we've talked about on this podcast, like I suppose my own interpretation, my own personal philosophy and poetic philosophy, and then I'm also putting a course on there on poetic philosophy and writing poetry and living poetry.
Okay. Sounds good. Get this here. Well, let's see. Actually, let me skip that. So, do you perform poetry publicly, like locally? Do you have bars that do poetry readings, or, I've got to admit my ignorance as far as like the public performance of poetry. The term slam poetry comes to mind. I don't know if that's something you do, or if that's even an appropriate thing to talk about. But
yeah, so in the past, I mean, my background has been I've always been involved in theatre and performance in some sort of way, and I used to do a lot of what we call open mic nights in the pubs around Manchester. I've done less of it over the years, and I haven't done it for a few years now. One, because we've moved away from the bigger cities, and two, because I've been more busy writing. I have been invited to do performances recently. So there's a few that are sort of penciled in for next year in the Netherlands and Ireland, and potentially over in America. But then I'm also going to put on. I'm working on putting on a show myself, just a sort of a small run of shows in the UK somewhere next year, of performance, like an immersive poetry performance.
Gotcha. Be sure to let me know where you're coming in the US.
Oh, definitely will. Yeah.
Well, so how long has the book been available now? When was its release date?
Just over 2 weeks. So it's 2 weeks on Wednesday, so like 2.5 weeks. Yeah.
What's been the most interesting feedback that you've gotten from a reader thus far?
I think just hearing which poems connect with certain people. I mean, I'm still waiting for reviews to come through, and so a lot of the feedback I'm getting is through either direct message or when people comment, and it always surprises me, when people say, "Oh, this is my favorite poem," or I think one of the nice surprises is I've had quite a few people who say, "I don't like poetry, or I'm not used to reading poetry, but you've, because I present my poems in a cinematic sort of way, I think that's allowed people to access or revisit poetry again." And I think that's both surprising, but also probably one of the things that makes me happiest, that if I can turn people onto other poets and to go and investigate, or even better, to write their own poetry, that to me is that's a real win. That I feel like that's worth doing what I do. If people are able to sort of see a video of mine or read a poem and decide to explore poetry and language further.
Gotcha. Well, what is the life of Samuel Hurley like outside of writing poetry, prose, and performing?
Much of what we talked about, I'm outdoors as much as I can. Certainly the last month or so, I've been quite fixed to my desk. which I struggle with. I'm not someone who naturally likes being still, as in certainly fixed to a computer. A lot of family stuff. I'm very blessed to have a lovely little family who mean everything. And becoming a father, which I never thought I would be something that I would be not good at, but it just wasn't really on my scope. But becoming a father has opened up the deepest, the most meaningful poetry of life for me, and it is my biggest joy. My biggest wins come from raising my two boys, and through that I get to sort of re-experience my own childhood again, and the things I remember, things that I thought were lost to the annals of time through them, and the joys that I get to revisit. And yeah, I'm nature, writing. I read a lot, but again, not so much the past couple of months because I've been busy and living. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, Samuel, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. It really has. These questions were so difficult. You sent over the best questions. This stuff I love to talk about. So I can't thank you enough for the care you've taken with having me on here and reading my book and actually thinking about things that made me think. Like that's I'm very, very grateful. My eyes lit up when you sent over sort of some of the subjects you wanted to talk about. So thank you, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Feeling is mutual. Thank you. Well, so as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug, reiterate, and let your readers know about?
No. I think we've covered lots of things. My book is out there. If it sounds like your cup of tea, give it a go, give it a read. And I hope if you do, if you enjoy it, or if you don't enjoy it, I hope it turns you on to poetry and other poets. There's so many talented people out there that are worthy of reading, and not just on the bookshelves on Instagram. I have many talented friends out there who have smaller followings who are worthy of being read and have meaningful work. And the same goes for artists and artists. Support people who make art.
Yes, absolutely. Well, definitely do stick around after we go off the air. Listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Samuel, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can watch the episodes live. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a new episode where I bring you the best writers and filmmakers in dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.